Welcome back, everybody, to Cinema Daily US. I'm Matthew Schuchman, and today we're here to talk about Spider-Man Brand New Day, the fourth installment in the Tom Holland-led Spider-Man series for Sony, which is still part of the MCU, of course, as you all know. And this film, of course, takes place after the not so recent, but still recent No Way Home, in where by the end of the film, nobody is allowed to remember that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, and even his friends don't know who he is. So this film, of course, deals a lot with a few things, including the fact that Peter is now friendless, still trying to make his way out as Spider-Man and Peter Parker. And then, of course, there are now new threats and old threats to deal with. So let's talk about the positives and the negatives, and let's start with the positives. Stepping in for John Watts, who directed the original three Tom Holland Spider-Man films, is Destin Daniel Cretton, who of course also made Shang-Chi for the MCU, but now taking on the Spider-Man character. While I do have negatives I will talk about, of course, it is probably the best MCU film that has kind of come out in a while now, at least for the mainstream, mainline characters, for that matter. There is a lot of fun to have throughout the film. There's some decent comedy here, and then there's some really good comedy elsewhere in the film. There are visual aspects of the action that really take a level of care that some other, not only not MCU films, maybe the past Spider-Man films didn't think about as much, because there's always this thing about, Spider-Man moving in slow motion to kind of help you understand his spidey senses here and there, but it's used in a more stylistic manner, I think, a lot here. There is a very quick clip of one scene you can catch in a trailer. They don't show you the whole thing, and it only lasts for a few seconds, but there's one thing that is both visually striking and fun to watch in a big fight scene, but also very funny at the same time. Everybody's still, very well versed in their characters, so nobody's kind of putting themselves down. I will say that, sadiesink, who's new to the series, while early on in the picture, I don't think she does a lot of great work. At the end of the film, she really shines, shows you why you would hire somebody like her to do this, and really is able to do what I would consider what I call true acting, which is not having to be so overly expressive, but still able to point out what a character is feeling without having to go so over the top emotional you think you're sitting in the back of a stage production, and they have to emote so highly for you to see it. So those points come at the end of the film for her, compared to the early thing, which is, again, not bad, but not really anything to write home about. There isn't anything that is super shocking, I would say, from what either you may know about the film already or you may have suspected about the film already. But I think it does a good job of not hiding what it's trying to do, because I don't think it is hiding it, or hiding it very well, I would say. But it really works out well in the case of just kind of going from A to B to C in your story. It doesn't bog itself down too much with, especially when you're dealing with a lot of characters in this, more so than you may expect it to deal with. And you may feel like you got some left out and loose ends, which there are, but in the main scheme of things, it does a really good job of making sure that you travel as an audience member that journey fairly easily, fairly well, without getting too lost and having to bog down in super exposition, and or even explaining these characters to some people who may not know who they are, because there are characters that are going to be recognizable to comic book fans, or not as recognizable to people who know maybe some of the names but don't know how they fit into these stories. And it doesn't bog itself down with having to go through too much exposition in all of that. It just gives you the bare minimum of what you need to know, and then it keeps moving, which I really do appreciate in any film whatsoever. But let's move on to the negatives, because I think they start to outweigh the positives in a lot of senses. Because, again, this is not a bad film, but at the end of the day, to me, as a viewer, it's more of a, okay, yeah, I saw it, it happened film. And that is because, I think, of the negatives. And while I did appreciate the way the story moves, and as I just described, that I did like the way the story moves itself along, there is a feeling that you get bogged down a lot trying to wait to get to a lot of the actual plot points that are there. Some of it is because of you have to do certain introductory things for people who don't know certain characters. Again, there are people out there who may have not watched the Punisher series, with just Jonbernthal's version of the Punisher, who does appear in this film. Frank Castle, of course, for those who know or don't know. Um, and the relationship between him and Spider-Man in those MCU television shows really doesn't. It's not a thing. So they have to kind of go through this quick idea of how do these two have some sort of relationship, because it's when he hits the screens, they know each other already. And that comes into play a lot later on. It's a good reason to know why they have a history together. But having to introduce it at the beginning of this film feels like it went by too quick, in the sense of that's the bad exposition dump. That's the let's get this out of the way, and then Frank kind of disappears a little bit until he becomes a more important part of the story later on. And it just felt flimsy in a lot of senses. And that's not just for the whole film. I'm not using that one item to describe the whole film, but there's a lot of that throughout the movie of like, well, we have to hit these certain plot points so we can get on tell this story that we're trying to tell. And they feel like they're just like, well, we know how we can do this in any other story, so we'll throw it in. For instance, at one point, unknowingly, Peter happens to see Ned in a convenience store. Ned, of course, his best friend from the other films, who now doesn't know who he is anymore because of the spell that Doctor Strange placed in No Way Home. And he follows him to find out, to see that he's now living in a new apartment with him and MJ have gotten together. And I guess they just moved in and they're having like this big housewarming party, but it's full of people who clearly they would never hang out with. And I don't know if there's no other flatmate. I understand they have friends. That's not they can't grow from the years they spent at college. There's now this is their after their college years, but it felt so out of character for the way that we were introduced to these two to have this not this type of party, but with these people. Not bad people who were inhabiting their apartment for this party, but it's clearly something that just was like, well, we had to have them have a party, so we'll throw it together, but it doesn't fit the characters that we were sold. And so that again is also kind of dragging a little bit of away from kind of having that full cohesive story. And to be honest, I feel that while it is an aspect of Peter Parker slash Spider-Man in general, I get the idea that in the comics he was a kid and then he grows up. But it feels like every single Spider-Man movie that Tom Holland has been in, and even the ones that are not just Spider-Man films, it's always about Peter Parker has to learn how to grow up. And at the end of that film, he's learned his lesson. Then the next film comes along and he's got to learn how to grow up again. And it may be a different lesson than growing up, but it's just learn how to do that one. Then the next film comes along far No Way Home was kind of like, okay, I finally learned. I realize the things I have to do to do this, and I accept it. Nah, we're gonna come back to having him to accept a different version of it again for this story, and I feel like it feels like we're treading over too much of the same emotions and too much of the same story at this point. That I'm kind of yearning for something new. I also felt that there were certain actors that were underused. Excuse me. I think there were certain actors. I think there are actors that I thought were underused. Tramelltillman, who I haven't even I haven't even watched Severance yet, but the few things I've seen him in away from Severance, I think the guy's brilliant, and I think he's just like completely. It's like he's just hired to be the name here that the people go, oh my god, that's the guy from Severance, and his character is so one note and clearly obvious what's going on with this character throughout the film that it felt like a waste in a lot of ways of talent to me. Again, I'm not saying it's bad, and I don't appreciate that he's there, but it just felt like hiring a name to have a name or a face to have a face, and it just felt like it kind of went nowhere for me as a viewer. There also, I know in the past this has been happened before, so I can't guarantee it. It happens very few times, but it has happened at least one time in the past where, as critics, we've watched a film from an MCU where there was not a certain post-credit scene available for us, and then all of a sudden the movie comes out and it's there. This movie, we did get one thing after all the credits ran, but boy, do I tell you, I can't believe that's what they made us waste our time for. I get, there's certain things we can't talk about because it's setting something up. And when you see it later, you realize, oh my God, that was crazy that they set that up then or it did this then. But it was a big letdown to the point where if that's where you're going to leave audiences when they walk out of a film, if they don't add something else in there, and that's what they leave audiences walking out of that film with, even if you love the film, it leaves a weird taste in your mouth at that point. So it definitely takes a few points off for me because of that. Again, not a bad movie, not an amazing movie. I think I would put my final grade somewhere like a B minus, sliding close to a C plus, but a B minus. I think there's a lot of stuff for comic book fans in there that they'll get a kick out of. But as far as just pure MCU fans who don't only know the movies, you may be waiting for a little bit more when Doomsday comes out to kind of capture some special magic. We'll see. But till then, Thank you for joining me. See you next time.